Hey everybody! So it's been a couple of days since I've last did an update, and again I'm sorry, but YouTube was being a bit of a brat for me, and I don't know what was going on. I just know that when I tried to do a preview of the video, I would get no sound at all. I'd be able to hear everything else on YouTube, and I could hear my other videos, just not in the preview, which led me to think that for some reason my mic wasn't working, except it was. And anyway, if it turns out that this video does not have any sound when I completely and truly upload it, then I'll do it again and maybe do it on my mother's laptop. Hopefully with better results. In any case, I'm excited for this chapter because it's got some beautiful, beautiful prose towards the end of the chapter, and it's the lull before all the good stuff starts to begin. And I was reading a little bit ahead, and I was remembering, oh yeah, this is where it starts to get good. Well, the next chapter is where we start actually meeting important characters. But this chapter is still good, and I'm pretty psyched for it. Again, so I can, warn people and not have to, hopefully not trigger anybody. There is discussion of Candy's father, a little bit of discussion about Candy's father in this. Again, he's an abusive alcoholic. If that's going to trigger you or bring up bad memories, skip on. Just, yeah. In any case, I'm excited. And before I begin, I figure I'll just show everybody this. This is my kitten Jasper. For some unknown reason, he's decided to sit right there right now. And I don't have the heart to move him. So anyway, we begin chapter... Why is my necklace all buggered up? Alright, there we go. I'm sorry, I'm nitpicky. With that, let's begin chapter 4, Street Ends. The bright rolling doodle stayed in Candy's mind's eye, even though her feet had obeyed its instruction and carried her out through the school gates and into the street. She briefly thought about going home, but the notion didn't stay in her head for long. She had no desire to be back in Followell Street. Though her mom would be at work, her father would be up and about by now, and he'd want to know why she had returned from school in the middle of the morning. So she walked in the opposite direction, down Spalding Street to the intersection with Lenox, over Lenox and on towards the Comfort Tree Hotel on Stillman Street. She had half a thought to call in at the hotel and tell Norma Lipnick exactly what had happened when she tried to tell the sad story of Henry Murkett. Perhaps she could even persuade Norma to lend her the passkey so she could go back up to room 19 and look at the sextant again, hold it in her hands and examine it, see if she got a clearer picture of poor Henry's last hours when she did so. But once she got to the hotel, she found the desire to see the sextant was not as important as another desire, one which she could not name or comprehend, but which kept her going on past the hotel to the intersection of Stillman and Lincoln. Here, for a moment, she stopped. The streets were busy in both directions, at least busy for Chickentown. There were 4 or 5 cars waiting at the lights every time they turned red. One of the drivers was Frank Wrightson, who had been a drinking buddy of her father's until 6 months before, when they'd had a big falling out. It had ended in a shouting match outside the house and a few blows half-heartedly exchanged. The men had not spoken to each other since. "Hey, Candy!" Frank yelled as he drove by. She waved, trying not to look too guilty for being out in the street in the middle of a Thursday morning. "No school today?" Frank yelled. Candy was just trying to figure out a way to answer this without lying to Frank Wrightson, when the woman in the car behind his truck honked her horn to hurry him on his way. Returning Candy's wave, he drove off. Which way now? She thought. She couldn't wait at the intersection forever. And then the decision was made for her. A gust of wind came down Stillman Street from the direction of the chicken factory. It stank of chicken excrement and worse. I'm not going to take Stillman Street, she thought to herself. So that left Lincoln. Without another thought, she turned the corner, and as soon as she'd done so, she knew that was the decision she was supposed to make. Not only did the foul smell disappear almost completely, but there, at the far end of the street, where Lincoln ran out of houses and gave way to prairie, was a cloud, vast and shaped like some enormous flower, blossoming as the wind carried it south, away from town. For some reason, the sight of it, its golden color, its shape, its sheer size, put everything she'd left behind, Miss Schwartz and her stupidities, Deborah Hackbarth and the rest, even the smell on Stillman Street, out of her head. Smiling as she walked, she headed on past the hotel and on down Lincoln Street toward the cloud. The wavy lines in her head began to fade now, as though they had done their job by getting her out wandering until she came in the sight of this blossom cloud. She'd seen it. She had her destination. The houses were thinning out now as she approached the end of Lincoln Street. She could remember venturing so far in this direction only once before, and that was because Patty Gibson, who'd been her best friend 3 years before, had brought her down here to show her one of the few memorial front lawns in Chickentown. It had belonged to an old woman by the name of Lavinia White, known to all as the Widow White. In place of flowers, Lavinia had planted plastic pinwheels in the grass, the kind constructed of brightly colored plastic that made a whirring sound when the wind spun them. No doubt the Widow White was a little bit crazy, because she hadn't simply put 3 or 4 of these things in her garden. She'd planted hundreds in place of ordinary flowers. Some bright scarlet, some eye-pricking green, some striped or spiraled. It had been quite a sight, Candy remembered. To her astonishment, she found that they were still there. She heard them before she saw them, their massed noise of their whirring coming to meet her down Lincoln Street. When she came in sight of them, she found that they were all rather worse for the wear. Clearly the Widow White had not replaced the pinwheels with new ones over the last few seasons, and many had been knocked over by the wind or had lost their plastic blooms, and she'd simply left sticks in the dirt. Before I go on, here's a little bit of art done by the author. It does not compare to what we get on the next page, however. And the cloud that Candy saw but perhaps 1 in 3 of them remained operational, and that still provided a bizarre spectacle. Candy glanced up at the house itself as she passed, and there, in the upper window, sitting in a wheelchair, watching the world go by, or as much of the world would pass, as much of the world as would pass by the last house in the street before the grasslands began, was old Widow White herself. She had her eyes on Candy, so Candy gave her a wave and a smile. The Widow White returned neither. There was no barricade or fence at the end of the street. Just a sign placed at the limit of the asphalt that stated with absurd redundancy, "Street ends." "Oh, really?" said Candy, looking up at the sign. Beyond it, there was just rolling prairie and the cloud. It had grown in size in the time that Candy had taken to walk down the length of Lincoln Street, and it was no longer moving away from town. The wind had changed direction and now seemed to be coming from the north. It had a curious tang to it, which was not the smell of the factory and its clotted drains. She didn't know what it was. She glanced back over her shoulder down the length of Lincoln Street. From here it was a half-hour walk home, at least. If the great gilded cloud was bringing rain, then she was going to get wet on her way back to Followell Street. But she had no desire to start the homeward trek, not for a little while, at least. She had no idea of what lay ahead of her besides the wild hills and the long grass, and the orange milkweed, the larkspur, and the prairie lilies in among the grass. But walking for a while where nobody, except the widow White, knew she'd gone was better than going home to listen to her father in the first stages of the day's drinking, raging on about the injustices of his life. Without another thought, she walked on past the "Street Ends" sign, catching it with her palm as she went so that it rocked in the shallow hole some lazy workman had made for it, and headed out into the gently swaying grass. Butterflies and bees wove ahead of her as if they were showing her the way. She followed them happily. When next she looked back, the shoulder-high grass had almost obscured Chickentown from sight. She didn't care. She had a good sense of direction. When the time came for her to find her way back, she'd be able to do just that. Her eyes glued to the great swelling mass of the cloud, she walked on, her griefs and humiliations left somewhere behind her, where the road ended and the ocean of grass and flowers began. And that is the end of chapter 4. And I'm really psyched for the next chapter. So I hope you tune in next time because it's starting to get good. And see you soon. Bye.